What most people don't know is that before you even start writing your GAMSAT essay, your mark is pretty much determined. Today's video, we're going to cover the 3 pillars of a cracking Section 2 essay. That's right, I'm going to break down secrets that I've never shared publicly before and show you what exactly separates 80, 85, 90 plus essays from the mediocre 60s and 50s. My name is Rohan. I've coached over 800 students, marked over 1,000 essays, and helped dozens of students get into medical and dental school. And in today's video, I'm going to share the 3 pillars of Section 2 GAMSAT that I have never shared publicly. Before we even get into the pillars, I think it's super important to understand where exactly we stand with Section 2. Section 2, being the communication section of the GAMSAT, tests you on how well you write, communicate, and express written ideas. Now, the biggest misconception that people often have with Section 2 is that you need to be some kind of economics or political expert to do well in Task A, and you need to be some like philosophical whiz to do well in Task B. I mean, fundamentally, what we're looking for in the GAMSAT are students who know how to express their ideas well. Like, you can think of the GAMSAT as like a test of throwing someone into the deep end. If you throw someone into the deep end with 30 minutes to survive, how do they swim? How do they float? What do they do? What strategies do they employ? ASA cares more about the strategies you use to survive rather than the specific strategies you use to learn about economics and politics. So when it comes to these essays, there's 3 things in particular I want you guys to always remember. Number 1, ideation. What do you say? Number 2, organization. How do you say it? And number 3, character. How do you come across when you say it? So these are the 3 biggest pillars when it comes to the GAMSAT. And in today's video, we're going to go through how exactly you can use these 3 pillars to transform your writing and turn your essays from 50s, 60s mediocrity into 80 plus surefire guarantees to get you into med school for next year. Okay, so let's talk about ideation to start with. Now, when it comes to GAMSAT essays, obviously you need matter to talk about. You need to write about something. And the topics in Task A are going to be socioeconomic, socio-political, or culturally related. And the ones in Task B are going to be more personally related. Now, what you have to do is make sure that you're prepared enough to respond to the topics on the day. You don't have to be an expert in these areas, but you do have to know enough to at least respond in a way which is clever, original, and interesting. So the natural question you probably have next is, well, what makes a good idea versus a bad idea, right? So you could cover economics, for example, you could cover politics, but if you've got a bad idea, you're still going to score poorly. It doesn't really matter how well you know it. It doesn't really matter how much you write. If it's a bad idea, it's not going to score very high. So there's 2 things I want you to think about when we're talking about good ideas. Number 1 is to simply just avoid the obvious. You see, with any given topic, there are going to be natural positions that people resort to. So for example, if we get a topic on globalization, I can close my eyes as a GAMSAT tutor and predict pretty accurately what 99% of people are going to talk about. People will probably talk about trade wars and trade conflict, or people will probably talk about people moving countries in terms of immigration. That's boring. It's uninteresting, it's unoriginal, and to be honest, it's going to put your marker to sleep. The second thing here is identify the tension. You see, in any given prompt, naturally, ASA will simplify it down to you. If you look at the GAMSAT prompts, and if you've sat the GAMSAT recently, you'll know what I'm talking about. They're very simple and short. For example, meritocracy promotes fairness. This is a very straightforward, basic prompt. Now, most people, what they would do in the situation is they'll look at meritocracy promotes fairness. They'll either agree or disagree, and they'll write 400, 500, 600 words, basically taking a side, coming up with some examples and some material, and hoping for the best. And then they get the results back, they get a 60, and they don't understand why. Okay, so what we want to look for here is the core tension. So the easiest way for me to think about this is to say the quote out loud. Meritocracy promotes fairness, but. So when we say but, what we're basically thinking about here is some added nuance. We're thinking about some other influences that are not being considered by the prompt, or we're thinking about what the prompt is actually supposing. So for example, I could say meritocracy promotes fairness, but at the expense of making inequality worse, thereby exacerbating crime levels in society. Now, don't get me wrong. That's not a perfect thesis yet, but it's way better than the prompt itself. So if we look at the nuance, we can look at the things we can contextualize and add in, or we look at the things that we can remove. All of our sudden, ideas and positions get stronger. Now, as I said before, it's not finished. There's more we can do there. So one of the other things we can do there is be more specific. And specificity is the name of the game when it comes to strong ideas in Section 2. So again, if I'm talking about meritocracy promoting fairness, I need to define my key terms and make them specific to something concrete. I only have 30 minutes to write this essay. I don't have an hour, I don't have a year, I don't have a week, I don't have a month. I have 30 minutes. So for me to tackle all of meritocracy is going to be very difficult. I need to narrow down my scope. So to do that, I want to ask myself, what form of meritocracy do I want to discuss in this essay? Now, on a Task A level, you can usually divide topics into economic, social, and political buckets. And then within those buckets, you can probably go further. So I might want to talk about meritocracy specifically economically, specifically as it has to do with Western democratic capitalist nations. So, for example, if I'm talking about meritocracy now with a much more specific focus on capitalist economies in the West, and as it focuses economically, I widen the scope of what I can talk about. I'm being much more specific with what I can talk about in the essay. The other thing here is fairness, right? So how do we define fairness? Well, maybe we're talking about fairness economically. Maybe we're talking about fairness in terms of moral virtue. Maybe we're talking about fairness in terms of just people having more money. Again, I need to define what that determinant of fairness is, especially because it's a subjective word. I need to make it clear to the marker what exactly I mean by fairness, because a marker's definition of fairness and my definition of fairness might be two completely different things. So these are things we want to settle and set up in our contextualization of the idea. And this is part of ideation. If your idea is really broad and basic, you're going to miss these nuggets. You're going to miss these opportunities to score easy marks. The other thing, and I promise you this is true, the more specific you get, you actually make your life so much easier as an essay writer. Like if I asked you right now to talk to me for 30 seconds about politics, what are you going to say? Maybe you're going to talk about the nature of politics. Maybe you're going to specifically talk to me about a politician. Maybe you're going to talk to me about democracy. Maybe you're going to talk to me about communism and populism. And maybe you're going to talk to me about all these different political theories. Like the point is that there is so much for you to cover about politics. It's actually sometimes harder to think about what to say. Whereas if I specifically asked you to talk to me about the Australian political landscape as it exists in 2025, specifically to do with the dynamics between the Liberal and the Labor Party and the modern rise of populism, wow, all of a sudden I've given you a super clear direction on what to talk about and making your life a lot easier so you know exactly what to say. So this is one of the biggest paradoxes when it comes to section 2. Narrowing your scope makes your life easier rather than broadening your scope, which actually makes your life way harder. All right, so as we've talked about in many essays, ideation comes to its forefront in your thesis/contention. This is essentially the sentence that finishes your introduction, gives out the roadmap for where the essay is going to go. This is the most important essay. This is the most important sentence of your entire essay because this one sentence does 1, answers the question. Number 2, provides a roadmap for where you're going to go. And number 3, allows you to showcase your perspective on the issue. So taking everything into account that we've talked about, originality, tension, everything that we've spoken about, here's a little formula you can use to craft your thesis. So you start off with something like X usually leads to Y, but due to Z, it leads to A instead, which has repercussions such as B, C, and D. So let me show you an example of that. So Western democracies have long lauded meritocracy as a source of fairness, but in its most modern form, it appears to worsen inequality and subsequent crime that emerges. So we've got the tension there. We've got what meritocracy, it should deliver fairness, right? But what we're saying in our essay basically is that it subverts those expectations. And instead of delivering fairness, it delivers inequality, it delivers crime, it delivers these worsening outcomes, worse standards of living as well. And you can see how that kind of idea approach is so much stronger than simply just saying something like meritocracy promotes fairness. It's so much stronger, and it's really something that can take your essays up 10, 15 marks just with one sentence tweak in that introduction. All right, now obviously we've just talked about the introduction so far, right? So if we're thinking about perpetuating this principle of ideation throughout the essay, one of the key things to think about is how you're going to segment that thesis and contention and separate it out into 2 paragraphs that complement each other well and focus in making your point clearly. So think of your topic sentences as cumulatively building towards your contention. In other words, if we take topic sentence 1, we take topic sentence 2, we sum them together, it should give you the contention, which we've just set up, right? The meritocracy promotes fairness or should promote fairness. However, due to certain implications, such as the creation of inequality, it actually worsens outcomes, it worsens crime, it worsens inequality. Cool. All right. So now, based on that, we want to think about how we can separate our 2 paragraphs to make sure that they A, both sum up together to give us a contention, B, are still relevant to the prompt, and C, are still focusing on creating a succinct, coherent piece of logic. So, for example, in topic sentence 1, I might say something like, in Western democracy, prized gateways to education let money masquerade as merit, widening the opportunity gap. And then in paragraph 2, I might say something like, as this opportunity gap widens, politics that reads outcomes as personal virtue legitimizes putative exposure and concentrates crime in deprived districts. So what I'm doing there across paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 is I'm drawing a connection. Like one way you can think about these paragraphs is like a chain, right? So it's like if part A kicks off, it leads to part B, and if part B kicks off, it leads to part C. And what we're doing there basically is showing causation. So causation is a really great way to demonstrate logic and coherency in your argument. In other words, you're showing relationships between concepts rather than making the mistake that a lot of people make in their essays, which is basically writing something that can coexist or self-exist without actually matching together. So a lot of students will write paragraph 1, paragraph 2, broadly about the same topic, but paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 are not talking to each other. We want to create an essay where paragraph 1, paragraph 2 bounce off each other, talk to each other, communicate with each other, thereby creating that sense of coherency, creating that sense of connection, and strengthening the overall flow of your essay. So, for example, you might say in topic sentence 1 that Western democracies marketize meritocracy and this prices pathways widens inequality. And then in topic sentence 2, you can talk about how that widened inequality concentrates more at disadvantage and forces people to act in ways which, for example, leads to crime, and crime obviously leads to worse living standards. All of this then wraps back together to your contention, which suggests that whilst meritocracy supposedly does propose fairness, it actually does the opposite and makes everyone's world and everyone's society worse. All right, let's move on to pillar number 2. And pillar number 2 is all about organization, how you lay out the information you've prepared. So here's the thing, you could have the best ideas. You could have the most original, insightful, tense ideas, but if you can't organize them properly, your ideas will be messy, frazzled, and unclear, and you won't get rewarded. So it's like going to a doctor who knows everything but can't succinctly tell you what's wrong with you. If you go to the doctor and you've got a problem, you need them to deliver the information in a way which you can understand. If they say it in a way which is too complicated and uses too much science terminology, you'll walk out not knowing what's going on. And if you walk out of the consultation just having had a yarn with the doctor or really not having had any insight into the actual scientific problem that you've come to him with medically, you're also not going to have a great time. So you need it to strike a perfect balance in between, which is the same thing we're trying to do in our GAMSAT essays. So for both task A, task B, I recommend a 4-paragraph structure, an introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. How you format those paragraphs, though, should differ quite substantially between task A and task B. Now, I've got plenty of videos that talk through this, and if you're interested, there's links down below in the description for that. But systematically, what you want to focus on for task A is a more argumentative piece. You really want to focus on the ideas and present a stance and then argue that stance, and do so within 2 paragraphs. And in task B, it's all about a more reflective format because you're talking about personal issues. So it makes more sense to take a personal experience, reflect on it, think about how it impacts you, how it impacts society, how it impacts all of us together as well. So I know what you're saying. You're sitting there, you're thinking, Rohan, I know this. I know I need to write a paragraph. I know I need paragraphs, I know we need body paragraphs, intros, conclusions, but the biggest problem I have is I don't know what goes in a paragraph. So let me introduce you to the EAI scaffold, and this is a framework that will really help you understand what needs to go in the body paragraph. So E stands for your example, A stands for analysis, and I stands for implication. Now, above and below the EAI, you should have your topic sentence and you should have your concluding sentence, and you might have multiple iterations of an EAI within a body paragraph because you might have multiple examples, you might have multiple subpoints that fit into your overall point, but this is the kind of set structure you can follow to really write systematically. Now, what this structure guarantees is that you will have evidence and you will have analysis that's systematic and really strong. So we all know we need evidence, but the question I want you guys to think about is why evidence is so important in the first place. The reason we need evidence is that it contextualizes and gives tangible proof to what you were saying. So if I'm talking about meritocracy, I'm talking about fairness, I'm talking about crime, inequality, these are all really like airy-fairy, abstract terms. I need contextual information that I can give you that allows you to see what I'm referring to when I say meritocracy. For example, if I'm talking to you about gated meritocracy through like priced pathways in education, paid colleges, tuition, etc., that's an example that you can relate to. It's an example I can relate to, and it puts us both on the same page. So we both know what we're talking about. We're both talking about the same kind of meritocracy. And this is so important because, again, if we're off the same page, my point won't strike very strong to you. You'll be confused, I'll be confused, and then the whole essay kind of goes to crap. So using our EAI framework, your first sentence within the body paragraph after the topic sentence should be your evidence. Now, something I've talked about before and something I will have a dedicated video for later on is the pyramid of evidence. Level 1, level 2, level 3. There's different types of evidence. Each type of evidence serves a different role, and you need to use all 3 different types of evidence in your essays. But for the sake of today's video, just think about evidence as the proof, the supporting tangible evidence that supports the point you're making. Now, once you've presented that evidence, what you next want to do is analyze it. To analyze your evidence, it's not as simple as just describing it. Describing, analyzing, these are 2 very different terms. So when we're analyzing an example, what we want to do is think about the cause and effect. So essentially, this is where you explain the mechanism of what you're talking about. If I'm talking about, let's say, for example, those priced education pathways, I'll talk about how they exist, how they fit into meritocracy, what they are, and again, show those relationships between other concepts, other information, other sociocultural phenomena as well. But you see, here's the kicker. Where most people stuff up is that they stop here. They provide an example, they explain the example, and then they just stop. right? So what you need to do now is the most important part. This is the I. This is the implication of your example. In other words, why on earth did I give you this example in the first place? How does it link into the wider context of the idea that I'm putting forward to you? So this is where you link back to the idea, and this is why you really have to ask yourself the question of, why is this important? So for example, if we're talking about these education systems, we're talking about the fact that people are priced out of going to university, people are priced out of getting into medical school or getting into other educational systems. The implication of that is that it worsens inequality. You have rich people who are getting into medical schools, you have rich people who are getting into these paid programs, and they're going to get more and more rich, more and more privileged, and you have the less fortunate individuals who can't afford to go to university, who can't afford to pay for these things, who unfortunately get left behind. And this is the implication. This is the big main point. This is like your slam dunk point that you're trying to make here. Now, again, as I said, you might use multiple EAIs in one paragraph. You may use 2, 3, 4. But overall, this is a structure that works for A and B. You know, it works for both sections. It works for both tasks. It's something that is really applicable regardless of what you're talking about. And it makes sure that systematically you're punching your way through the paragraph, not missing a beat. And it avoids you making a lot of the mistakes that weak, mediocre essays do make, which is that they're overly descriptive. They just talk about examples. They don't know how to lift beyond examples. You need to get strong at going beyond your examples and focusing in on the implication. That is really where you earn your marks, and that is where you'll see huge improvements. All right, and then we come to the third pillar. And the third pillar is all about character. It's all about how you come across as a human being through your essays. Now, again, let's just take a step back and think about what we're doing here, right? We're not writing essays because we're trying to be journalists. We're not writing essays because we love writing. We're writing essays because it's 1/3 of the GAMSAT, and the GAMSAT exists for you to get into a degree of your choice, probably medical school, but for some of you guys, dental school as well. So fundamentally, this is an entry exam. It's trying to filter students out based off how they communicate, right? Now, here's the thing. ACE learns nothing about you across section 1 or section 3. They learn about how well you can select A, B, C, or D out of, a couple of options, how well you can process information, but they don't learn anything about you as an individual. That's where section 2 comes in. So how you approach these issues, how you present your arguments, small things can make a huge difference in how you come across. So what I want you guys to do is think about the traits that you would want a doctor to have. What are the traits? What are the characteristics you would want a medical professional to house? You'd want them to be confident. You'd want them to be compassionate, maybe thoughtful, introspective, clear, precise. Like, these are all traits that we want to see in doctors. And guess what? These are the exact same things that are going to help you soar in section 2. So you need your essays to feel confident. You need to take a stance, pick a side of the fence, and stick to it. Now, that doesn't mean that you ignore the other side, but it means you make it very clear where you sit on the fence, where you sit on the particular issue. What ACE will always punish is essays that flip-flop. So you think this, and then for the next paragraph, you switch over. Like, no, you need to pick a side and you need to argue it convincingly. Again, that doesn't mean you ignore the other side. It doesn't mean that you don't acknowledge the weaknesses of your points, but it does mean you pick a side convincingly, because we don't want to go to a doctor and the doctor spends 10 minutes telling us why the cyst on our neck is a cancer, and then the next 10 minutes telling us why it's a cyst, and then the next 10 minutes telling us why it's a lump in the thyroid. Like, we need answers. And you in your essays, you need to be confident to provide those answers as well. Like I said though, other things like compassion and thoughtfulness are really, really important. So you have to showcase the ability to A, take a stance, but B, showcase that you can actually think through these issues empathetically from someone else's perspective. Also, think about the stance you're taking. If you're taking a stance that is really lacking in compassion, that's showcasing a lack of regard for people who are not privileged or don't have access to who are not privileged or don't have access to resources, that's showcasing a lack of empathy, lack of understanding. So you need to make sure that the stance you pick is chosen in a way which showcases empathy to a certain group or whoever the kind of main group is being impacted by the issue of the essay. Now, those are kind of like personality traits, which are really important, but also stylistic traits in terms of how you present your arguments are really important, right? So clarity, super important. You don't want to go see a doctor who's not clear with how they communicate. So you need to prioritize clarity in your essays. So students often think they need to use big words, long words, 10, 15 letter words to score well in the GAMSAT, to sound sexy, to sound smart. No, honestly, you can do super well in the GAMSAT by using the vocabulary of a 10-year-old. It's all about how you piece those words together, how you present your argument collectively, rather than using these big words, which I tell you right now, so many students use incorrectly. They think they're using a big word because it sounds cool, and actually using the word completely incorrectly, and it makes their essay look even worse. Precision and specificity is another thing. We've talked about specificity when it comes to ideation, and it's the same thing when you're thinking about how you want to come across as a person. You want to come across as someone that is precise, that is knowledgeable, that is accurate, and that comes through as well in how you argue and how you talk about issues as well. These are things that you really need to be aware of in terms of how you're coming across as a person in your Section 2 essays. There's a couple of things you can do to immediately prevent yourself coming across the wrong way. Number one, pick a compassionate viewpoint. It's very straightforward, right? But if you're picking a perspective that's probably going to come across as racist, discriminatory, just scrap it, right? Number two, don't come across as arrogant or egotistic. Now, the exception to this rule is when you're doing a task be reflection and you're showcasing a time in your life where maybe you were once egotistical and arrogant and now you're showing how you've transformed. That's great because that's showing a transformation of personality. But if you're simply just coming across and bragging about your sort of experiences, maybe you're bragging about the fact that you've done well in your undergrad degree or bragging about the fact that you've got a lot of money or whatever it is, it's just not going to go down very well. It doesn't come across, it doesn't shine a positive light on your character either. On that same vein, if you're arrogantly arguing something and sort of coming across as if you're some kind of expert on the issue, that's also not going to come across very well. So one of the things that scores really poorly is over-certainty on an issue. You always want to consider the fact that you're arguing these issues from a place of curiosity and from a place of what you think rather than what you know. So I might say something like, it appears to me that meritocracy creates X, Y, Z implications, rather than it's obvious to me that meritocracy creates X, Y, Z implications, right? Something as small as that, it might seem really negligible or tiny, but it makes a huge difference in how your essays actually come across with the tonality and how certain you come across. Again, you want to come across as someone that is intelligent and insightful, but also someone that is open to having your mind changed, right? So again, thinking about the weaknesses of your points, accepting those weaknesses and actually acknowledging them is a super great way to showcase that ability and showcase that characteristic in your essays as well. Okay, just a side note, guys, if you're interested in a free PDF framework that completely breaks down my 3-step SLAM system for essay writing in Section 2, click the link in the description down below. You'll get a huge PDF with tons of information, packed with examples, packed with annotations, super helpful to getting you on track with Section 2. Click the link in the description down below and it can be yours in the next few seconds. All right, so your 3 pillars, there they are. Now let's have a look at how it looks in practice. Let me show you one of my best essays and let me show you how I use these 3 practices, these 3 pillars to perfect this essay. Alrighty guys, so there you have it, the 3 pillars for magical Section 2 essays. Number 1, ideation. Number 2, organization. Number 3, character. So I want you guys to think about how you can improve on these 3 pillars in the next practice essay that you write, making sure that you're prepping well ahead of your next GAMSAT sitting, and situating yourself with the best opportunity to score well in Section 2. It is not uncommon to soar up 10, 15, 20 marks in Section 2 if you know what you're doing. And if you want a hand-by-hand, step-by-step process on how to fix up your Section 2, get active, regular feedback from myself as an experienced GAMSAT tutor, you can click the link in the description down below. I'm taking final enrollments for my group classes starting soon for Section 1 and Section 2. You can lock up your spot there for less than $30 an hour. It is a cracking deal. I can't wait to see you in there. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video.